Thanks for watching this video from the Bible Fulfilled. My name's Alex Polyak. I am the director of the Bible Fulfilled. And today I'm going to be talking about Job's resurrection hope. If you're not familiar with Job, he was a wealthy Gentile from the land of Uz, which is modern day Saudi Arabia. And he probably lived sometime between Noah and Abraham. The Bible describes Job as being blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He was very wealthy. He had 10 children, but he ended up losing everything. If you remember the story in the book of Job, Satan had complained to God that, the only reason why Job worshiped God was because God gave Job everything. He made him rich. But if Job lost everything, Satan said, then Job would no longer worship God. He would curse God to his face. So God allowed Satan to test Job's faith by taking away everything that, he had, basically. Soon Job lost everything. His livestock and his livestock were stolen, or they were killed. His children were killed. He was afflicted with painful boils all over his body. So basically, Job lost everything, right? And during this time period, his 3 friends visited with him, and, they discussed theology and, life in general. And in one of Job's statements, and this is the passage, by the way, that's often used to prove a future physical resurrection. So Job said, here's what Job said in Job 19, verse 25 to 26. Quote, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth, and after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I will see God." So again, this is Job 19, verse 25 to 26, and this is the New King James Version. And by the way, as I'm going to show in a second, this is very important that this is the New King James Version, because other Bible versions interpret this passage differently. Okay, so as this passage says, at least the New King James Version, that, Job said that after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I will see God. So, on the face of it, this seems like a pretty good proof text for a future physical resurrection. At least if you happen to be reading from the New King James Version. But if we dig a little deeper, we'll see that there are many problems with this passage, and that's what I'm going to go over in this video. Before I begin, though, I want to give credit to Don Preston for pointing out these things. The points I'm going to make basically are all from Don Preston's video called "Responding to Steve Gregg, Resurrection, What About Isaiah 25 and Job 19." So if you get a chance, listen to that video. Okay, so with that said, what are the problems with Job's statement? My first point is this. Scholars readily acknowledge that this passage, and I'm talking Job 19, verse 25 to 26, is a notoriously difficult passage to translate. And there are many disagreements about what it actually says. N.T. Wright, the Bible scholar and Bible historian, points out in his 800-page book called "Resurrection of the Son of God" that very few biblical scholars appeal to Job 19, verse 25 to 26 to prove the resurrection, or prove a physical resurrection, because of all the problems associated with the passage. One huge problem, as I just said a second ago, is that there's widespread disagreement about, what this passage actually says. As I just read, the New King James Version says, "And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I will see God." That's what the New King James Version says. However, the McClintock and Strong Biblical Cyclopedia, which is put out by conservative Christians, by the way, so this is not some, liberal, book or liberal encyclopedia. It's put out by conservative Christians. And they say that this passage should actually read, "Out of my flesh," instead of "in my flesh I will see God," which gives the passage the exact opposite meaning. So again, the King James Version says, "And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I will see God." Okay, that's the King James Version, but the McClintock and Strong Biblical Cyclopedia says it should read, "And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that out of my flesh I shall see God." So the McClintock and Strong Biblical Cyclopedia translates the passage the complete opposite of how the New King James Version translates it. And this is not just some one-off translation, by the way. Other Bible versions that read this way include the American Standard Version, the Complete Jewish Bible, the Darby translation, the Amplified Bible, Classic Edition, and the Message. So this passage, Job 19, verse 25 to 26, is not as clear-cut as, some commentators would have us believe. Okay, now let me move on to my second point. It is that Job says elsewhere in the book of Job, that there's no physical resurrection. Here's what Job says in Job 7, verse 10, quote, "He who goes down to the grave does not come up." And in Job 10, verse 20 to 21, Job says, "Cease, leave me alone, that I may take a little comfort before I go to the place from which I shall not return." Other passages in the book of Job that say similar statements are Job 14, verse 1 to 22, and Job 17, verse 13 to 16. So these passages seem to indicate that Job did not expect to be, resurrected physically. Here's something else that's interesting, though. In Job 14, verse 14, Job says, quote, "Oh, that you may hide me in the grave, that you would conceal me until your wrath is past, that you would appoint me a set time and remember me. If a man dies, shall he live again? All the days of my hard service I will wait till my change comes," end quote. So Job says, the point I want to make really is what I'm focusing on, is Job says, if a man dies, shall he live again? So it seems that Job was at least contemplating whether, man would live again, right? And here's what's interesting, is this is the exact same question that Jesus seems to answer in John 11, verse 26. Here's what Jesus said, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." This is John 11, verse 26. So Jesus seemed to answer, Job's question, if a man dies, shall he live? And Jesus said, yes, if I am the resurrection and the life, he who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. And we know Jesus was not referring to, physical resurrection in this passage, because Christians have been dying physically ever since he said that, right? Jesus' own apostles died physically. So Jesus was obviously referring to spiritual resurrection in this passage. And again, here's what Jesus said, "I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die." So this seems to be the exact same thing that, Job was contemplating when he asked, if a man die, shall he live again? So I think that's actually Don Preston made this observation that this is a pretty interesting comparison. So these kind of passages in Job, seem to indicate that while Job did not believe in a future physical resurrection, he did seem to believe that people would at least live again, at least spiritually. At least he was contemplating that. So that's interesting. Okay, let me move on to my third point. Another problem with using Job 19, verse 25 to 26 to prove a future physical resurrection is that many theologians and commentators do not even think Job was talking about the resurrection in this passage. Rather, what Job was talking about is God, healing and restoring Job to what he had prior to losing everything, prior to God letting Satan test Job's faith. In Job's culture, when a person lost everything, he was considered to be dead. But when he was later restored. It was called a resurrection. So when Job said, I know that my Redeemer lives, and in my flesh I shall see the Lord, what Job was saying, according to many commentators, is that God would, restore everything he had, within his lifetime. And that's exactly what ended up happening too. If you, read the end of the story of, in the book of Job, God restored everything that Job had lost. The story ends by saying, quote, now the Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, end quote. This is Job 42, verse 12. So Job got everything back at the end of the story, at the end of the book of Job. So this context fits perfectly with, with what many commentators believe that this passage is referring to, which is, that God would restore everything. So, and again, like I said, in Job's culture, when somebody lost something, he was considered dead. But when he was restored, that was considered a resurrection of sorts. So many commentators say this is what Job was referring to in that passage. He wasn't talking about his own physical future, resurrection sometime down the road. Okay, so let me move on to my fourth point, and it is this. Jesus and the apostles never cited Job 19, verse 25 to 26 to argue for a future physical resurrection. Now, this is an argument from silence, but, it seems to speak pretty loudly. If Jesus and the apostles believed that, Job was referring to a future physical resurrection, in this passage, somebody from the New Testament, probably would have cited it, but they didn't. Furthermore, when Jesus and the apostles did talk about the resurrection, particularly the timing aspect, they repeatedly said it would happen within the lifetimes of their first century audiences. For example, Jesus said, quote, most assuredly I say to you, and he's talking to the Pharisees here, the hour is coming, and now is, when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. This is John 5, verse 25. So Jesus said the hour is coming, and now is. So the resurrection had already begun, at least in part, by this time period. And, Jesus said this during his earthly ministry in approximately the year 80-30. Another option is that Jesus was speaking proleptically in this passage. In other words, the resurrection, Jesus believed the resurrection was so close to happening that it would happen so soon that he spoke about it as if it was already a reality. And we talk like this too sometimes, right? We'll say like dead man walking to refer to somebody who's about to die. I mean, this guy is, like somebody on death row. We'll say dead man, we'll call him a dead man walking. He's not really dead yet, but he soon will be. So that's what Jesus may have been doing in this passage when he said, the hour is coming and now is when the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. He may have been speaking proleptically, because it was so soon to happening. The resurrection was so soon to happen that he spoke of it as if it was already a reality. And this would seem to fit perfectly with some of the statements that his apostles made too. For example, Paul told some of the Thessalonians that he was talking to that some of them would still be alive when the resurrection happened. In 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 15 to 18, Paul said, for this I say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord will by no means precede those who are asleep. And this is sleep is a euphemism for, being dead. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of an archangel, with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. This is 1 Thessalonians 4, verses 15 to 18. So Paul said, we who are alive and remain until the coming of the Lord. And then Paul also said, we who are alive and remain shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So Paul seemed to believe, at least this passage seems to indicate that Paul believed that some of the Thessalonians would still be alive when, when the resurrection happened or when the coming of the Lord happened. Paul said the same thing to the Corinthians, by the way. In 1 Corinthians 15, verse 51 to 54, Paul said, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep." In other words, we shall not all die, but we shall all be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we shall be changed. For the corruptible must put on incorruption, this mortal must put on immortality. For when this corruptible has put on incorruption, and this mortal has put on immortality, then shall be brought to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. End quote. This is again 1 Corinthians 15, verse 51 to 54. So Paul said, we shall not all sleep, but we shall be changed. So this seems to indicate that Paul believes some of the people he was talking with would still be alive when the resurrection happened. In another passage, this time by Peter, he said in approximately the year 8063, quote, "They will give an account to him," and he's referring to Jesus here, "who is ready to judge the living and the dead, for the time has come for judgment to begin." This is 1 Peter 4, verses 5 and verse 17. So by this time, by the year 8063, or approximately whenever Peter said this, Jesus was ready to judge the living and the dead. The time has come for judgment to begin, or the time had come for judgment to begin. So this is obviously referring to the judgment, to the resurrection, I should say, the resurrection and the judgment of the living and the dead. So over and over, Jesus and the apostles said that the resurrection would happen within the lifetimes of the people that they were talking to. So it must have happened in the first century. And since there was there's no evidence of a mass physical resurrection in the first century, then it must have been a spiritual event. Keep in mind that Jesus' resurrection was physical, but the general resurrection was spiritual. Jesus' physical resurrection was a sign or the proof that the general resurrection, the spiritual general resurrection, really happened. For more about this topic, by the way, check out some of my other videos on the resurrection. I'll put some links to some videos in the video notes below. I talk more about this, about Jesus' resurrection being a sign of the spiritual general resurrection. So check that out if you're interested. Okay, so while Jesus and the apostles never used Job 19, verse 25 to 26 to prove a future physical resurrection, they repeatedly said that the resurrection would happen within the lifetimes of their audiences. So it must have happened, long ago. So for these reasons, I don't think Job 19, verse 25 to 26 supports a future physical resurrection. In fact, I think the general resurrection must have happened in the first century, per Jesus and the apostles. All right, so that is it for today. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please do me a favor, hit the like button. If you want to be notified of new videos, hit the subscribe button. Also, for more detailed information about the topics discussed in this video, get my book, The End is Here, How the New Testament's Prophecies Were Fulfilled. I go over such topics as the second coming, the resurrection, the end times, the new heaven and earth, the third temple, and a bunch of other topics. So get my book if you're interested. Also, you can go to my website called thebiblefulfilled.com. I have a bunch of free articles and videos there, so you can go there too. All right, so thanks again for watching. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.